Welcome to Windows on the World. Interesting one for you tonight, the internal and external revolution. Well, both of these are steering mechanisms. The internal and external revolution versus the eternal and unconquerable. That's what we're going to be talking about. Yes, profound stuff, but all simply explained. If it's not simple, then it's no use. Yes, tonight's show is called Faith and Fashion Beyond the Boundaries. Over the years, it has been pointed out on this show that those who arrive from nowhere and gain a large following are there for one reason: to mislead, absorb and drive their followers into one or numerous dead ends, or even worse. This can include group action, which can be detrimental and destroy the group. Individuals incur losses. Does this sound familiar? We've seen a lot of that, haven't we? Well, some of us have seen a lot of it. Some of us are still caught up in it. It's called the mind virus. The purpose of our recent show, The Perfected Minefield, was to make attaining higher information more clear and easy. Of course, a simple approach is always best. This to get directly to the highest source of information. Do look at our recent shows, The Perfected Minefield and Ritual and Religion. Ritual and Religion is both a full show and also a small mimetic slice of information, really. It's a new way of doing things, and you'll find that at windowsontheworld.net. You can find that on our Odyssey channel. Of course, we're still using YouTube, and you'll find all our shows, of course, in the Spreaker archive until we move them later this year. All the information is on the homepage. Should have said that at the beginning, but let's get on with it. The purpose of our recent show, yes, was to make attaining higher information more clear and easy. And yes, indeed, a simple approach is always best. The perfected minefield. This to get directly to the highest source of information. Pretty much everything else is a deliberate or unintentional distraction. It's all about attention and intention and avoiding being hijacked by gurus, groupthink or media trends. On the way to this, one has to gain knowledge, and with this comes insight. Insight is deeper than the outer world, which contains distraction. It is the mixing of the two which balances information. Acting from impulse or laziness is, of course, fatal. It is not only critical thinking that is necessary, it is something more. The extra something where clarity and insight happens. Having an extra sensory capacity is entirely and actively discouraged. Most often, 99% of human activity is unnecessary, a distraction and a waste of time. In time, this becomes a habit and habitual behaviour. Just imagine you had 3 days to live. What would you do? Live every day like that? Sounds a bit like one of these empowerment gurus, but when you actually think of it like that, a sense of urgency really does come upon you. Most will value distraction, however, over focused and simple fact. The lie, of course, goes round the world before the truth has got out of bed. We live in a so-called information age, but what sort of information is this? The training which comes of this is distraction, unconscious action, idle, low-functioning brain stimulation, entertaining dead ends, an addiction to some kind of action being played out. Excitement over trivia. This is mesmerism, one of the chief instruments of control. Through, of course, all media. Used to be only television with its flickering waves, but now it's everywhere. Overstimulation leading to fracturing of the attention. Excitement over trivia. Getting excited by trivia and repeating it. This is all part of the mind virus. It is to be, in effect, against nature, against the world as it really is. When this is pointed out, there is a knee-jerk backlash and many excuses are forthcoming to justify it. Have you noticed? Well, I work hard enough, I need some time to relax. These are the sort of excuses that get used all the time. Anyone who has challenged this knows what happens. Denial, abuse, character assassination and logical fallacies are following pretty soon. Abuse and derision comes from the usual suspects and then from the mass consensus. The modern day heresy, of course, is pointing this out. It ruins the party for those who need team leaders. The reason all this is important is that the distractions have gotten much worse and ever more banal. Although this subject has been covered much over the years on these shows, it is important and it's out of all public knowledge and debate pretty much all the time. It is one of the main drivers of change for the worse, going nowhere or backwards. Yes, the virus of the mind. As soon as one distraction appears, another one appears. As soon as that ends, yet another one appears. There are always multiple distractions simultaneously. Something to capture everyone and every group. Something that will resonate for everyone. And importantly, it creates sides for further distraction and dissolution of all useful action. This only makes sense, of course, when reaching a position that takes oneself outside of it. To be outside looking in on a higher level is more than just observation. The distractions lead into permanent mindsets, unconscious egregors which have a life of their own. These in turn create entities, and yes, they all have lives of their own, which are separate and distinct from the group which created them. So another important aspect of this, and something that's talked about a lot, is symbolism. Well, groups adopt symbols. Symbols in and of themselves have no real innate power. People talk of the power of symbolism. The symbol itself has no power. The power is given to the symbol by the one person and then a group. The power lies in how they are adopted into the mindsets of people and what people believe they are. The symbol becomes then symbiotic with the person. The person can define themselves by a symbol and be defined by it, which is much more important and one of the major goals of symbolism. This is essential, as then the group and its individuals can be attacked over one symbol alone. We've seen this time and time again, and we see it from all angles. In the West, for instance, the swastika has become associated with evil because of the blaming of evil acts on the group who recently adopted it. It is presented as such to remind us of the evil acts which are purported to come from a group. However, the ancient swastika is a sign of good fortune and life in all Hindu countries and nations such as India and Nepal. In these countries, the so-called Star of David, which of course it isn't, or symbol of Refam, in reality two interlocking triangles as above so below, is also very common. Common in both India and Nepal. Both these symbols are then also used in combination. The interlocking triangles often have a swastika in the middle. The hexagram, of course, in the middle, which forms the centre of the two triangles. Now, to the Westerner, this is confusing. They see the triangles and think of Zionism, the state of Israel and Jews. Inside, they see what appears to be the enemy of this symbol, the swastika, to which is attached, of course, the most negative connotations. It causes literally denial and cognitive dissonance. This means, of course, nothing to the Hindu, who has been using this combination for a few thousand years. National Socialism and International Zionism mean nothing to a Hindu unless they have looked at Western narratives and history. Symbols are therefore subjective. They have no inherent or specific power in and of themselves. The symbols are only meaningful and powerful through group activity and displayed by the members of the group. The old Nazi newsreels now look like something from another planet. The classical symbolism used alongside the swastika looks really alien, alongside all the gold-painted plaques and the goose-stepping soldiers and the people with their very classical look and something really of another age. What would a Hindu make of this? Surely they would laugh at such idiocy. So symbols are used by groups to symbolise power and to unify the group. The symbol becomes their identity. They wear it, then become defined by it. It becomes their identity, creating a group identity and form of its own. Symbols can be injected into groups to dissipate their power. For instance, a swastika flag at a peace rally would be called far-right hate. It means, though, nothing of the sort in its original and ancient form. This is where the basics of the unified field can be injected to dissipate these thought forms which are carried through symbols, simply to not be triggered or react to what are in essence nothing of importance. They are inanimate and benign until weaponized through groupthink, external programming and wrong assumptions. Symbols are used as weapons. They are weaponized. They can intimidate outsiders. We've seen this in the recent Choose Your Side events, which have been going on in the Middle East, being exported to the West and being seen on the streets of London and other cities. It is fear of symbols which brings them power. They paralyze the unfiltered mind. Conversely, it is the power of the group which bring power to the symbol. Symbiosis. Symbols are therefore used as signs of conquest, conquering the minds, then the lives and property of others. Your mind is only important as your property. It is the most important property you have, and it is the property that is wanted most. It is conquered by an army with multiple fronts of attack on conscious awareness. It is a choice, and making a choice on a wrong choice simply means you have lost control of your property, your mind. The only domain which at all costs and on all fronts must be protected through conscious awareness, through a perfected mind field. Today we have memes. These are easy to remember and easily repeated. When chanted in groups, they have power. The subversives who create these memes know this, of course, very well. The chants have no real essence or proper meaning. It is with this in mind that the chants that are given to the public are inverted. They have opposite meanings. Those who create them find it devilishly amusing. Whose streets are streets? This is what democracy looks like. Choose your side. Fascist scum off our streets. What do we want? Climate justice. When do we want it? Now. No justice, no peace. These memes are to disempower and ridicule those who chant them. Their power is inverted and acts as a psychological and deliberate backlash against those who adopt them, self-defeating, self-sabotage. They dissipate and neutralise, then destroy the power inherent in the group. It sets up one created entity, of course, against the other. It tires out both sides and stops any unifying action or conscious method of overriding it, because the group no longer has its own mind, collectively and individually. These are mesmerizing mantras. This is self and group hypnosis. In recent times, this has become an industry through funded and powerful NGOs. The main aim of the conspirators is to disempower and bring all under control. When people talk of mind control, it is often from within groups which are ironically under very strict mind control. The use of words like mind control can actually mean nothing when more subtle tactics are being used, and this is not easy to grasp by those using the term. When we talk of a system of moods, it is often misunderstood to mean something negative, that somehow it is putting out the fire. Well, in a way it is, because the fire spreads when it's out of control. Basically, let's put it this way. Where are the fires of indignation against this blatant mind control? They are not part of the picture as it is presented. They are only outside it and easily put out by the group itself. When the fire spreads, it is out of control. It literally can no longer be stopped, and people literally get carried away. This is a point we made in the perfected mind field, that these egregors, these thought groups, become these psychic groups. They become not physical groups, but they become mind groups of their own, and they can get out of control. They can be pushed over the limit and over the top, and then they become the chaos which is necessary to bring in the order which was already planned. They have their destinies diverted and controlled, all with their own consent. Well, consent is essential. Nothing happens without your consent. Consent should therefore only be given to actions that have not only been carefully considered, but come from a direct source, the perfected mind field. Now, this may sound abstract, but think about it, and think about what we said in those shows, to actually be aware of the unified field, that interconnected, I hate to use the word interconnected because it's used so much by the globalists and the New Age, but that connection between everything, that connection on a conscious level, which every sentient being on the planet actually has. And from that state, everything comes. And when people get out of that state, then they are out of their own control. So yes, to repeat that, consent should therefore only be given to actions that have not only been carefully considered, but come from a direct source. When energy is dissipated through a bombardment of sound bites and imagery, the mind can be open and susceptible to anything, which feeds it pleasant and, of course, ego-gratifying involvement. Mind candy. This is what it is, which neutralises the brain and rots away intelligence and volition. Advertising used to be the main area and used this to the maximum. Now it is called self-empowerment, or just groupthink. Those who follow the most banal propaganda and the latest fashions are called fashion victims. Victims are helpless, they have been disempowered. This masquerades as being ahead of the pack. It is called lifestyle choices. Another inverted phrase, it means the opposite, an imposition from an outside influence which brings the victim nothing but empties their pockets and brings them under control, and that is their privilege, that is their lifestyle choice. So in other words, when you see lifestyle choice, you're being led into something. There's no choice involved at all. This is associated with success, another misimplied and abused word in the present. The obsession, of course, with things like glowing teeth and rubber lips and pulling faces back over the ears has produced some of the most dumb-looking and deformed Homo sapiens in the history of the species. However, when these unfortunate people die, they will just look like Homo sapiens because the illusion, the skin will have gone and only the skeletal remains will be there, which of course have not been affected. But this is in effect socialization of self-harm and self-hatred. Narcissus looks into the pool and sees a monster, basically another reversal of reality. The inversion of language is one of the most important weapons in recent times. The restriction of language into the inverted sound bites is a major part of a deception being played out against a duped population. They simply don't understand what they are saying, being manipulated into using words and phrases that are inverted against them and their common interests. One more reason why the need to perfect one's mind is paramount. Nothing can be achieved unless this obstacle is overcome and completely removed from conscious action and unconscious repetition. In recent times, more and more are falling by the wayside whilst believing they are finding out how things actually work. The word for this egregor or groupthink or another dimension of illusion is now called an awakening or waking up. Basically being thrown from the fire back into the frying pan, finished off and absorbed back into the greater plan. The new communitarian system of communistic theories is updated, and we're going to get into that a bit later in the show. But we've seen everything in the New Age, from the belief in friendly alien forms, all from different constellations, of course, such as Sirius, Cassiopeia, the Pleiades, and most important pollutant of the mind is channeling. It opens oneself to outside influence and believing that information is coming from a particular source when there is no evidence where it comes from. I actually bought out of interest a book that was channeled from the Pleiades. I've never seen such banal nonsense in my life. If these are aliens, they are retards and we should not be listening to them. Or they are quite clever and they're just giving humans mind candy, which will make them become even more powerless. This channeled information is often what the channeler wants to hear. It appears it is mainly from the lower demonic realms. So-called spiritual mediums can be out and out fakes or are reiterating something from entities whose greatest pleasure seems to be to mislead. Now, I'm not saying this without any foundation evidence. I am saying this from a very long-term look at it and through real searching, because having experienced a lot of this stuff, I have found that the lower demonic realms, which are basically irritants and can be quite dangerous, are omnipresent whenever these people are around. And I went to this exhibition years ago, and when I walked in, someone said, "Don't go over there." I said, "Why not?" I said, "Those mediums, there's a load of them, and they're channeling something." And this person said it had really affected them, like it had been like an electric shock to them. And I went in and found the same thing, but it also made me completely, to use that cliche word, discombobulated. I could no longer focus. It completely knocked me out. And This is the opposite end of what we're talking about, the perfected mind field. This is why it's conscious. It has to be conscious. So, yes, reiterating something from entities whose greatest pleasure seems to be to mislead. Well, on a local level around you, I have observed this phenomenon, a great mind virus of delusion, trapping those who are egotistical or needy or worse, vulnerable to infiltration. It takes so much work to get past this kind of misinformation that it is impossible for those who are drawn into it to discriminate. At worst, they channel this into mind groups. And so congregations become infected, whole groups become infected with these egregors which can live on independently of the group. Even in seances, these entities masquerade as famous dead people or anyone they think the channeler will believe, usually dead family members. I can confirm this after experiencing people who are into spiritualism and these seances. They cause local interruption with things flying around the room. They can cause footsteps, they can make things disappear, and they can also, at the very worst, attack members of the circle, and those people can actually lose their minds. This is on the extreme end, but mainly it's lower dimensional intrusion, and who needs that? So only loose and lower intelligences are found in this immediate channeling area. They can cause localized disruption, and that's at the very least. The perfected mind field, of course, is beyond this area, but part of the unified field, loosely what is called consciousness. Well, trying to explain this simply is all that can be achieved through speech. There has to be a use of extrasensory perception for it to truly sink in. One has to actually align one's mind field so that one can see it. A once well-known researcher told me that the spreading of the mind virus was done specifically through the Universal Church, which had incorporated necromancy with the reverence for the bones of saints and the belief that the high priesthood believed they had control over their dead priests and actively controlled their departed spirits through physical means such as lead-lined coffins where souls were believed not to be able to escape from, and rituals using incantations. This is at best low-level black magic. At worst, it's actually mental illness. And this, of course, has been used in all lower magic for thousands of years, often by people who have no idea what they're really messing around with. For instance, to give you an example of this universal church belief, the Bible translator John Wycliffe, well, his remains were dug up 43 years after his death, ritually burned at midnight, and his ashes thrown into the river Swift to disperse the whole egregor or minefield of those who wanted to read the Bible in their own language. This is the twisted belief of this particular priesthood. And this goes for other belief systems also. Well, in our recent shows and short audio, Ritual and Religion, we covered this subject. The emptiness of ritual is when it becomes merely repetition, as in mindless chanting. This is completely unnecessary, apart from when the initiate is using it because they cannot still the mind. After this has been achieved, it is of no use whatsoever. When groups chant in unison, it can hold power, but that power is not from individuals in the group, but it is a separate egregor or entity which is of the group but not part of it. It is an entity which can be directed by outside sources. The group energy can be harnessed by a third party. This is how protest groups are steered into time-wasting confrontations or grandstanding. Now, I'm going to have a quick break here and come back with something slightly different but on exactly the same track, and I hope you'll be able to put the two things together because it's a pretty rapid fire show. I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Bartholomew's Fair, and if you haven't checked out the last live stream we did, it's called Friar Forest and Dervel Gadon, The Strange But True Story. It's available on YouTube and Odyssey. Of course, we prefer people to go to Odyssey, but I'm using YouTube at the moment because Spreaker has been a bit problematic recently. But as I said, we're moving on to better places later in the year. I just do not like to jump just yet because I've already paid Spreaker for the whole year. So I don't want them to have the money and be able to put it in their pockets without giving me my money's worth, basically. So, yeah, take a look at that. And there's a lot of stuff I want to put out. Working on the Shattered Isles film. Gonzalo Carrera is doing some music for that. So it's all going ahead. So do support the show. Appreciate those who do. And yeah, there's so much information I want to put out. We're going to get on now to the world revolutionary movement, how it's supported, of course, by Britain. I mean, where is Karl Marx buried? Highgate Cemetery. Of course, Highgate Cemetery contains many subversives, and it was also used for the Hammer horror films because its crypts and the tombs there are very, very Gothic indeed. Do pay a visit to it if you haven't done so already. But of course we have this obelisk, where it's like a huge grave with this bearded buffoon on it. Well, he was worse than a buffoon, Karl Marx. And we have to remember, of course, that there's a lot of talk around Marxism. And those middle class people who talk about it, they talk about it theoretically. Of course, practically, they never talk about what it really is. And the new communitarian system of communistic theories is updated from so-called atheists, Marx, and people like his cohort, Proudhon. Revolutionaries, part of the world revolutionary movement, funded assets of what is actually behind the egregores and the adversaries, or the great adversary, Satan himself. It appears, though, that Marx and Proudhon were not atheists, but actually Satanists. Although from a Jewish background, Marx was brought up in strict Christianity and turned on it, and turned to its adversary. He was in tune with exactly what the world revolutionary movement wanted. So he became just a steering mechanism for them. Marx hated himself and everyone. He parasited off his mentors all his life, including Frederick Engels, who was actually involved in cotton mills in the north of England. He was an industrialist, much more industrious, of course, than Marx, but not as useful to the world revolutionary movement. But a sponsor of it nonetheless. Marx is quoted as saying, "Daily my wife tells me she wishes she were lying in the grave with the children, and truly I cannot blame her." But the historians have probed Marx's background and have generally failed to uncover the reason that he had become so bitter against Christianity and all its teachings. A few honest historians have uncovered something that changed Marx's views, and that something was Satan worship. Marx had discovered the world of the occult. Marx had first been brought to the ideas of socialism by Moses Hess when he was 23, but the most important influence in his young life was the worship of Satan. Many of his friends had discovered this religion before he had. One was Mikhail Bakunin, a Russian anarchist who wrote, "Satan is the first free thinker and saviour of the world. He frees Adam and impresses the seal of humanity and liberty on his forehead by making him disobedient." Another friend of Marx was Pierre Proudhon, a French socialist and writer. Marx had been introduced to Proudhon by Hess. Proudhon worshipped Satan, according to a book about him and his relationship with Karl Marx. He had written that God was the prototype for injustice. Quote, "We reach knowledge in spite of him. We reach society in spite of him. Every step forward is a victory in which we overcome the divine." Now, of course, this is against the perfected mind field. This is going against the divinity which is within. It is denying the divinity and then destroying it, therefore making oneself just a biological robot or entity. So Proudhon said, God is stupidity and cowardice, God is hypocrisy and falsehood, God is tyranny and poverty, God is evil. These are the sort of people who were useful for the world revolutionary movement. Proudhon, of course, was involved in the French Revolution. He was very, very high up in that. Where humanity bows before an altar, humanity, the slave of kings and priests, will be condemned, he says. I swear, God, with my hand stretched out towards the heavens, that you are nothing more than the executioner of my reason, the sceptre of my conscience. God is essentially anti-civilized, anti-liberal, anti-human. Now remember what the word liberal came from and what it now actually means. It means extreme leftism, bordering, of course, on the old communist principles. Well, Proudhon declared God to be evil because he believed that God had denied man his ability to reason. Now, if we look at the age of reason, the 17 and 1800s, this was all part of the world revolutionary movement, and the injection of Darwinism into the belief system was merely a new form of Satanism. This is as polluted as the minefield can get, and no wonder where communism took those who fell for it. Notice that the thoughts of these men were not those of an atheist. Marx and his friends at their stage of their lives, this particular stage that we're talking about, when they were young revolutionaries, were not atheists as present-day Marxists describe themselves. Now, this Marxist ideology has been totally integrated into communitarianism. If you look, for instance, at most of the union leaders and many people in these unions, they are out and out Marxists, but really communitarianism. This is just the Marxism and communism updated into its new form, where the word is community. So the word community is an imposition from above that masquerades as representative of you when it is them. Just another way of using the system. It's just another simple twist, basically. Another diversion, deflection of reality. So atheists did not challenge his existence. They challenged God's supremacy. The thing that changed Marx's view about life, apparently, was the fact that he had discovered the world of Satan worship. There is an evidence, and this is according to Ralph Epperson in his book, The New World Order, which came out around 1990. I read it at the time, but I wasn't aware of some of the chapters in it. I'd forgotten about it, and I was just looking through it the other day. I was on a podcast quite recently with Jay from Holocene podcast, and he'd read it, and he said it was just nothing like he thought it was going to be, because he thought it was going to be about how the New World Order is explained really through globalist sources, because that's where we get it from. So let's carry on with this. So Epperson states there is evidence that Marx had joined a satanic cult headed by Joanna Southcott, a satanic priestess who considered herself to be in contact with a demon named Shiloh. One of the distinguishing characteristics of his membership in this cult was his long hair and unkempt beard, worn by members of her cult. Proudhon also wore his hair in a similar manner, and it is quite likely that he was a member of this cult as well. I don't think Epperson is just saying this frivolously, by the way, because if you look at both the Russian Revolution and the French Revolution, you can just see these kind of characters coming up, these revolutionaries, growing their hair long with their beards, and even the women trying to emulate such characters as Joan of Arc, the women with their swords and their long flowing dresses, and it's all very classical looking. It's all presented as something very romantic, but of course it's nothing of the sort. And Epperson says that other communists have also declared their hatred of God. A communist named Florenz wrote this in 1871. Our enemy is God. Hatred of God is the beginning of wisdom. Another notable communist, Nikolai Lenin, the father of the communist revolution of 1917 in Russia, also voiced his hatred of God and religion. He wrote the following comments. Atheism is an integral part of Marxism. Marxism is materialism. We must combat religion. We of course say that we do not believe in God. We do not believe in eternal morality. That is moral. That serves the destruction of the old society. This is the revolutionary movement. Basically, this is what all revolution is about. Everything is moral, he says, which is necessary for the annihilation of the exploiting social order. Well, of course, Lenin wished to destroy the old world order and replace it with a new world order. And in doing this, he was going to unite the proletariat. He says we must combat religion. Down with religion. Long live atheism. The spread of atheism is our chief task. Communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and morality. Religion is a kind of spiritual intoxicant in which the slaves of capital drown their humanity and blunt their desire for decent human experience. This is Lenin, of course. He says, we shall always preach a scientific philosophy. We must fight against the inconsistencies of the Christians. Now, this is interesting. Preach a scientific philosophy. Of course, now we see the outcomes of doing this. We have a thing called the science, which goes against all the principles of what was known as science. Well, Lenin, like Marx before him, came from a religious family. His father was a school inspector and a devout member of the Russian Orthodox Church, but at the age of 18, Lenin started reading Karl Marx and soon was expounding Marxist principles. He later wrote, "Atheism is a natural and inseparable portion of Marxism, of the theory and practice of scientific socialism. Our propaganda necessarily includes propaganda for atheism." Other communists have joined the attack on religion. Nikita Khrushchev, Russian dictator who embraced the communist theology during the time he spent at the top of the Russian government, wrote this: "Do not think that the communists have changed their minds about religion. We remain atheists, that we have always been. We are doing as much as we can to liberate those people who are still under the spell of this religious opiate." So, liberation, liberty, equality, fraternity. These are the foundations of the world revolutionary movement and have been the schemes which have been put into action through all Freemasonry and now all change agents on the planet through NGOs. We no longer need Freemasonic lodges because the infiltration is complete at every level. This is where it is essential to own your own property, to own your own mind. That is the most important property, and it is the property which is most sought after. It is the gold of the enemy. Once they have your mind, they have everything. The soul will, of course, soon follow when it is left up to people like this. But notice that Mr. Khrushchev went one step further than some of the other atheists. He stated that the task of communist atheists was to liberate the God-fearers from their God. This obviously is the task not only of the communists, but of the so-called New World Order or New System. Well, in conclusion, this is why the globalists use these ideologies, as they encapsulate their war on faith and the highest governing authority or God. Only accessible, of course, through the perfected mind field. Their aim is to destroy and stop the faith in God versus their material physical world, as it encapsulates everything they hate. They are using every tool at their disposal, and their main tool is you. Do not consent. Well, do you consent consciously or unconsciously? The perfected mind is the only antidote, as it goes beyond the limited tactics of the great adversary, who believe with the followers a throne is ready to rule from. There is no need to make it easy, and there is no reason at all to be conquered. Saying "I do not consent" is actually just another of their memes. Once their tactics are known, however, they are already defeated. Well, I hope that was useful and interesting and stimulating to people who listen to it. That's the whole purpose of these shows. as we said in our Protocols of Power series. A series of statements which may cause an outbreak of thinking. Now, this is not a mass outbreak of thinking. It is the outbreak of thinking which people may be able to get to just through these small shows, which are really just encapsulating ideas. And these ideas will lead people onto other things. That's the whole point of the shows that we do. It's not to encapsulate everything. It's to lead people into their own bigger picture so they can see exactly from their own point of view to beyond the horizon and beyond what is surrounding them. That's the whole purpose of these shows, is to kind of break through and get away from all the falsehoods. So, in conclusion, I hope you found that useful, and do check out both the Odyssey channel and the Spreaker archive on the live shows page, and do support the show if you can, and do send info into info@windowsontheworld.net.